So let's get into what took place over the weekend in Texas. There has been a lot of talk. Well, you can go back since the Supreme Court rolled back the Voting Rights Act. They gutted the pre-clearance provision, under which about, I think it was 16 counties in about 14 states needed to go to the DOJ before they changed anything in their voting because of their history of racially targeted voter suppression.
And the Supreme Court essentially was like, racism's over, so we don't need this anymore.
We don't need this anymore. I mean, they almost literally said that.
Yeah, but that was the argument.
And they did say, however, that if Congress got back to the drawing board and created a new formula for what constitutes a need for preclearance, they'd be open to it. Now, this is incredibly egregious because they had rolled this back. I think it was 2013 or 2011. And within months, you had states, all of these states, imposing new voter restrictions. But it had all been reauthorized in 2007, almost unanimously. And I think it was Scalia said something to the effect of, well, they were just afraid in the Senate to vote against it.
Talk about judicial activism, deciding what the Senate thinks from your judge's chair. Doesn't seem
Absolutely.
To square with his position, huh?
To the extent that there's anything
R.I.P.
that exists that is called judicial activism, it has to do with, I mean, to the extent that it exists, it is specifically substituting your reasoning for the legislatures when they have been explicit in reauthorizing a bill.
Or even worse, presupposing what their internal fears are as senators. That takes it to a whole nother level.
Then saying and then we're going to discount them.
Right.
So, but put that aside. I mean, that was, it was, I mean, no, don't put it aside. I mean, that's what the reality is. And we have seen just an onslaught of these type of voter suppression. We have seen the gerrymandering. We've seen the Supreme Court refuse to deal with the question of gerrymandering. They are on the brink of basically saying that you can't even have independent commissions to deal with gerrymandering. This is, and since Donald Trump's loss and the ginning up of election fraud, and understand, this has been a long-term Republican project. Make no mistake about this. This is not a Donald Trump innovation. You go back to 2005, 2004, Karl Rove is pushing U.S. attorneys. These are members of the Justice Department in each state. Bring me voter election fraud cases. And these U.S. attorneys couldn't find any. They could not find any. They could not bring any. And so what you had was the mass firing of a lot of these U.S. attorneys by the Bush administration, and it basically blew up into a big scandal.
Oh, this is just a Trump era problem.
And so the Republicans have been on and on with this.
Yes.
But Trump, he is the culmination in many respects of all these Republican projects, and just was a little better at marketing it and triggered the sort of authoritarian impulses of a significant portion of our population. He comes out, says the election was stolen. It motivates an assault on the Capitol, 140 Capitol Police injured, 5 people die in the course of it, in one form or another. There's new release of information for prosecutors today that the Oath Keepers had positioned quick reaction forces around the city, some across the Potomac who had boats that were ready to come in with weaponry.
Yeah, it's part of their, Call of Duty cosplay situation.
It was, but it gets you into the mindset of what these people were thinking. And you start to realize, like, this was as real as anything could be.
That wasn't to belittle it. It was more just to kind of just take a peek into the mindset of it.
Yes. And they knew, or at least that they thought they knew what was going to go down. This was not a spontaneous thing.
Yeah.
And it also spurred Donald Trump's, it spurred this rash of basically laws to restrict people's voting. And the latest was in Texas. And it looked like this Texas thing was unstoppable. It would have banned after-hours voting. It would have prohibited ballot drop boxes in drive-through voting centers. It would mandate that all weekday early voting take place sometime between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m., though draft language would further limit Sunday voting, early voting to a maximum between the hours of 1 p.m. and 9 p.m. It would make it illegal for elections officials to send applications to vote by mail to people who did not request one. It would bar counties from helping facilitate the distribution of unsolicited ballot requests. Require voters requesting absentee ballot to provide their driver's license number or social security number on both their request for a ballot and their return envelope containing their ballot. It would impose a $1,000 a day fine on local election officials who do not follow prescribed procedures to update their voter rolls, criminal penalties on election workers who obstruct poll watchers, et cetera, et cetera. Can't register to vote online in Texas. The whole idea is we're just going to put as many obstacles as possible, and the totality of these will capture people. We can see this even in the context of the vaccination, right? Look at the difference, the vaccination rates. Once you hit the people who really want the vaccination, this is something that is going to save people's lives. And still, any type of obstacle, people don't do it. And so the idea is we want to discourage voting, these Texas politicians. And so the Democrats had no way of stopping this, or at least they thought at first they had no way of stopping this. And here is Sarah Eckhart. She's in the 4th District of Texas, Travis County. She's going to explain why they wanted to block the Republican voting bill at the Texas legislature.
We were in a conversation across the aisle for 8 hours over Saturday night and into Sunday morning. We didn't leave the chamber until 6:30 a.m. after an 8-hour conversation with our Republican colleagues on the Senate floor. They remained unmoved. But the evidence is clear that this bill does not add integrity. It actually adds more than 10 criminal penalties and criminal enhancements. They are criminalizing people who are seeking to vote. They are doing this. It's no surprise that Republican leadership doesn't want Democrats winning, but Republican leadership also doesn't want to let in certain kinds of Republicans. The current Republican leadership only wants extreme culture war advocates who will take orders only from them. They do not want more people voting, Republican or Democrat. They only want their specific type of voter making it to the polls without intimidation.
Okay, so she outlines there that they were in conversation for 8 hours, and then she sort of implies what happens next, which is that Democrats in the Senate, the Texas Senate, realize, okay, if we're not here, there's not going to be essentially a quorum. And so we're going to go. We're going to
Peace.
We're going to leave.
Yeah.
This is reminiscent of I think it was the Wisconsin 14, who attempted to stop the the bill that was killing health insurance and the right to work in Wisconsin under Scott Walker. And they basically left the state. They had to be brought back by cops ultimately. But here is Texas House Democrat Joe Moody explaining why they basically left they walked off the House floor to deny the Republicans their quorum.
The idea that you can break quorum is something that's is always out there, and when you're pushed to extreme, you respond to that with extreme, and so we always had that tool at our disposal. And at a certain point, it became very evident that the only way to stop this legislation, at least in the short term, was to not be present.
Why was this worth it? What was it about this legislation that made you stage this walkout?
Look, the right to vote is something that we hold very dear and near to our hearts, and for the people that we represent, it means everything. The franchise is something that was never taken for granted in communities like mine, and we will never take it for granted. And so when people come to challenge that and people come to take that away, we're going to do whatever it takes to maintain the franchise.
Now, the reason why this tactic works, at least in the short term, is that the session was coming to an end. There was a limited amount of time for this bill to pass, and by walking out, it has to be reintroduced, and they have to go through the whole process again.
And what they also did was Texas Democrats, by basically forcing Republicans to adjourn and walking out, they also kind of torpedoed their own initiatives, which, like, police reform was on the table, I believe. Bail reform was on the table. But I think the Democrats in Texas accurately understood that, okay, well, this is the existential threat to voting in our state, and they chose to blow it all up, exercise the nuclear option, right? I mean, this is, as, the Washington Post article on this framed it, this is some kind of lesson for national Democrats. But leaving it to this, I mean, that was the right thing to do, because if this bill is implemented, then we're talking about Republican control in an undemocratic fashion in Texas, one of the largest states in the country, that is undoubtedly going to spread throughout.
And what's interesting about the efficacy of this type of thing is that Abbott was pissed. Greg Abbott, he was the governor. Mm-hmm. He said that he would, today, veto the section of the state's budget that funds the legislature after they walked out. Apparently, state lawmakers are paid $600 a month.
Wow.
700. Well, I mean, it's not nothing, but they also get a per diem of 221 day that they're in session, including both regular and special sessions. Now, here's the interesting thing. Abbott promised to revisit this bill later in the year when they're back in session. He said he will have maybe a special session to redraw the districts, to do a little gerrymandering. There are some people that voting rights advocates in Texas say that the fact that he's not doing this right away suggests that the publicity around this has been has scared Abbott a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, because, I mean, it's not just, as Brendan pointed out to us, it's not just the state senators that would be screwed over. It's the staff that work there. Oh,
you mean in terms of the funding?
The funding.
The funding. But I'm talking about the scheduling of this again.
Okay.
And one of the dynamics that we've seen in the past is that when there are restrictions placed on voting, it ends up drawing a lot of cash into get out the vote measures, and it draws a lot of attention there. Now, and sometimes it renders that ineffective. We should say, though, however, it is redeploying resources from one column, that is maybe promoting people, getting people to vote for, and putting it in another, which is to get out the vote. Abbott could be afraid that this drew a lot of attention to the idea that they're preventing people from voting. This is a dynamic I was just actually explaining to my son last night, which is like when you tell somebody they can't do something, sometimes they get a little bit more adamant about doing it. And so
we saw that dynamic in Georgia.
We saw that dynamic in Georgia, and particularly this, the second round of voting. Certainly, with there to a certain extent. I mean, you can see what happens when. I mean, it draws out people to vote, but again, it's costing more money. You're redeploying funds. So I think Abbott was a little bit worried about this. That I think it was, it certainly drew attention. And then the other thing that these Texas lawmakers were saying is that the feds, the Democrats in Washington, need to fix this. They need to pass a bill, which coincidentally is known as S1 in the Senate.
It's available to them, already written. How convenient.
HR 1 in the House. These are major pieces of legislation that have been written to protect the vote. It is, and then of course we're into the filibuster territory.
The steak is already marinated. They just have to put it in the oven.
Now there are two. You put it into the oven as much. Maybe you might want to put it on the grill. I'm not going to get caught up in that.
Yeah, okay. The chicken's marinated. Put it in the oven.
You might also put that on the grill. But the point being that
you're a man.
The point is, look. The point is that I just never put my steak in the oven. I just don't do it that way. The point is that there's opportunity. It may be the John Lewis bill. I mean, it really depends on what President Manchin says. But we are going to see Chuck Schumer, I think it was on Friday of last week or Thursday, basically outlined in a letter what was going to happen in June. And there was going to be a number of measures where everyone anticipates they're going to fail because they do not have the support of 10 Republicans, because nothing will get the support of 10 Republicans if it's part of the Democratic agenda.